Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the World University Ranking Arab Region 2022 Launch and Conclave. To start with the proceeding, I would like to welcome Dr. Ashwin Fernandez, the Regional Director of the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia at QS, to make his welcome statement.
A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and privilege for us to host this edition of the QS World University Rankings Arab Region 2022 Conclave and Launch here in Dubai. I'm sure that this will be an intellectual event besides being an award ceremony. The Arab region has a centuries-long history of excellence in higher education. As we move together to the 21st century, the region is facing immense challenges, as well as bringing several opportunities for its students, educators, institutions, and people, around areas that include the future of work and research. The conclave today, which is organized on the theme of enhancing Arab excellence, a new vision for higher education in the region, is designed to tackle and explore how higher education can further enhance itself to meet those challenges and to take advantages of the opportunities for equality and prosperity. Universities in the Arab region today need to adapt and provide learning for jobs of tomorrow. As the global business landscape evolves and presents new challenges and uncharted territories of opportunities to explore, much time and effort must be invested in developing new forms of education, one that offers ambitious learners an applicable sense of direction. Mapping out the future of work is vital to helping prospective leaders find their place in the world. Hence, at the sidelines of the launch of our QS Arab Region University Rankings, which ranks 181 universities across 18 Arab states, it will fuel the desire and beckoning of building knowledge powerhouses in the region. At this conclave today and at this evening, we will have over 140 university representatives, out of which 50 university presidents are amongst our gathering, from various countries in the region. As you can see, the format of this summit, or the conclave, is very unique. We have designed it in a way to be very intuitive and hope that every one of you can not just listen, but also participate in these discussions. I would like to thank our hosts, Zayed University, for co-hosting this event with us and supporting to bring this event right here in Dubai. I would not like to take much of your time, but would like to wish this event and all of you all the success for a fruitful discussion and collaboration amongst the Arab region. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ashwin. I would like to also thank once again our host partner, Zayed University, in organizing this event. Now, speaking about Zayed University, please join me to welcome Professor Clayton, the Provost and Chief Academic Officer at Zayed University, to make his welcome remarks.
Well, I'm honored to have been invited to give this opening address to this illustrious company. Though I have to admit, I'm probably the worst qualified candidate to do this. I've been in the Middle East less than 8 months. And my only connection with the region before that was my honeymoon in Egypt and 3 days stopover in Libya because the plane I was on broke down and needed spare parts to be sent to it. So I owe a special vote of thanks to Ashwin for his faith in me. And of course, I'd like to thank him for all the hard work he, his team, the QS members, ZU, Wassam in particular, have put into this project, into this conclave. The tour of Zayed University was beautifully organized. Thank you to everyone who's played a part in this, and this is a wonderful room to be meeting, and I've never seen this room before, so it's marvelous. I'd also especially like to thank the many, as I say, illustrious people who've come from different parts of the Arab region, perhaps with some difficulty getting here, but I'm sure your presence here will help to make this event even more successful. At a ranking conference I attended a few years ago, a lady in the audience from the University of Glasgow stood up and wondered why we should have rankings at all. The University of Glasgow, she said, has survived very well for 500 years. So why now should the world be so enamored with ranking exercises? This seems quite a good question until you begin to break it down a little. The University of Glasgow was founded in 1451, that's 50 years before Columbus reached America. It has had almost 600 years to build its reputation as a wonderful British university. During those 600 years, Britain colonized a quarter of the globe. And the colonizers cultivated the idea that anything British was gold standard. Of course, that meant by extension that the old British universities were gold standard. So when universities in the developing world began to sprout up in the 20th century, the University of London was used by dozens of new universities under a scheme of special relationship. In this relationship, the University of London was actually termed the gold standard. And this meant that universities from Trinidad to Nigeria to the South Pacific would model themselves on the London structure. They would be accredited by London University, they would award University of London degrees, and eventually they would award their own degrees, which would look very much like University of London degrees. Indeed, the first degree taught at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria was a degree in classics. I don't want to become too political here, but I am an alumnus of both Glasgow and London universities, and I undertook my legal studies at the University of London and my PhD at the University of Glasgow. But I think we can all see the advantages that history can bestow on universities. When I saw the job advertised for the provost of Zayed University here in the UAE almost a year ago today, I had never heard of Zayed University. For 4 years, I had already been a provost at a university in Hong Kong, which had a very strong British orientation. So having impulsively applied for the job at Zayed, I began to research it thoroughly. The more I looked at Zayed University, the more I was impressed by it. And working at Zayed University over the last 8 months has confirmed to me that this is a glittering jewel, a world-class university in its way. And I am quite certain that many of you here today come from institutions in the region that are just as impressive. But does the world beyond know about it? Perhaps not. I would not have known about Zayed University had I not come across a job advertisement quite by accident. One of the great virtues of world rankings is that they provide common platforms against which universities can measure themselves. And those platforms are public and international. A university that goes up the rankings will get noticed on a regional and on an international stage. That's important for young universities who don't have the advantages of history and reputations shaped over centuries. And the kinds of questions ranking organizations like QS ask are important questions. What's the quality of your research? Are your faculty active publishers? What's the staff-student ratio? What do employers think about you? How do you connect with other universities? Even if there were no such things as rankings, these are questions that every university ought to be asking about itself. So, how do young universities like Zayed climb the rankings? How do they get noticed? I mentioned earlier I spent 4 years as a provost in a Hong Kong university. The Hong Kong university system is the most successful small system in the world. There are 8 government-subsidized universities in Hong Kong, and at any given time, 4 or 5 of them are in the top 100 of the QS rankings. But that wasn't the case at first. Initially, universities in Hong Kong relied on what they called optimization. In other words, shaping the figures, picking the right days of the year to measure the metrics, like student enrollments, hiring top faculty on full appointments, but allowing them to work from, well, wherever they lived. These optimizations achieved a rise in the rankings, but the universities in Hong Kong discovered that could only take them so far. At a certain point, when a university was super optimized in terms of the rankings, there had to be a substantive, fundamental change to the institution to make it advance further. Now, there are several ways that this can be done, but Hong Kong had its own particular way of doing things. They simply pumped research money into universities, billions upon billions of US dollars, through competitive research grants, equipment funding, travel grants, and many other routes. 3 years ago, Hong Kong doubled the amount of money it provides for university research projects. That's very different to the UAE, of course. There's no centralized government-supported grant system here. I'd be very interested to know how the idea of a centrally funded research grants system plays out in other countries represented in this room. Certainly, very few university systems have research money of the magnitude that Hong Kong has. So what other ways can we use to raise standards? Well, one other way is to combine with other universities in order to create critical mass, to exchange expertise. Australia is a good example of this phenomenon. Australian universities tend to be very competitive. So in Adelaide, where I was dean for 6 years, there are 3 main universities: Adelaide, Flinders, and the University of South Australia. The relationship between these 3 universities in Adelaide is really quite hostile. And that's because in Australia, students tend to go to universities in their home city, and therefore the universities in that city have to fight. They have to fight for those students. So there's a struggle for supremacy. So the University of South Australia, for example, would be more likely to collaborate with a university in Singapore or Malaysia than with a university across the road, which was the case when I was there. What universities in Australia have done instead is to establish connections with interstate universities. In other words, these are universities in a different state of Australia. So Australia consists of a number of states, rather like the US. But it means that they're not competitors, because being interstate means you're 2 or 3 hours away by air from the other university. So there's 5 universities, for example, who formed the Australian Technology Network because of their interest in technology. And they work together, combining their resources and pushing themselves forward. And because they're a long way from each other, there is no sense of competing for students. I would be interested to know if such models of working together already exist or could exist in this part of the world. The Arab region ranges over 13 million square kilometers and consists of 22 countries. There is great potential in this region for universities to establish deep and lasting networks that could help universities advance by affording critical research mass and sharing expertise. So with that, I bring my talk to a close, perhaps asking more questions than giving answers, but that, I guess, is why we have conclaves like this. So without further ado, let's get down to the business of finding some answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Clayton. I'm requesting you to remain on stage, please, to chair the next session with the title of Future of Higher Education in the Arab Region. Please, Professor, go ahead and request the panelists to join you.
Yes. I will ask our panel to come up and take a seat, please. There's Dr. Haifa Jamal Al-Alail, President of Ifat University in Saudi Arabia. Is Dr. Haifa here? Ah, thank you. Thank you. A little round of applause, please. Dr. Michel Mawad, President of the Lebanese American University in Lebanon, of course. Dr. Shadi Hijazi, who is the Principal Consultant of QS, that's Quacharelli Simons. And Professor Abdallah Al-Hawash, Founding President and Managing Director of the Alia University in Bahrain. Thank you. So the format we will adopt is that there are a series of questions, and I will put these to the panel in each case, and just a fairly quick answer, please, and then we'll open up that for discussion. So and then we'll go to the next question, work our way through, and we do have a great deal of knowledge around us, so we look forward to learning from this experience. The first question is a request to please give a brief perspective on how your institution is playing a role in the development of higher education in whatever country or region you are coming from. So I just throw it out. Who would like to go first? Ladies first. Ladies first. Thank you, Dr. Haifa.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this great panel. And I thank you for the great speech, Professor, for speaking about Glasgow, speaking about London School of Economics, London University, and the whole world, and then how you zoom to the Arab world and what is the difference between both in history and reputation, and how ranking is really important maybe for these days and time for the Arab world. Ifat University is a very small private university started in 1999 for female only, and then we became a university in 2009 with ability also to accept for the master's degree male students. Ifat University, since it started till now, we are trying really to go in line with the economic development of the country and the whole region. And it is with the new structure and the new kind of reform that's happening now in Saudi Arabia, not only in education, but around everything, which really stemmed from the vision of King Salman and his crown prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Both of them really have a great and massive kind of reform in different levels. I think I'm sure that you heard about women empowerment, the economic kind of liberalization, and a lot of things. In education, it is really becoming a different kind of landscape. The landscape, and a lot of university came out in just only like 10 years ago, opening up to absorb the capacity of more capacity for the student high schooler coming from not only from Saudi Arabia but from around the world. Now they're accepting a lot of non-Saudis. The idea here is really to focus more on quality, not only on quantity. And then they started the the NCAA, the National Accrediting Agency, which really got the three kind of models and integrated it into one, the Australian, the British, and the American. So the input and the process and the output really as part of the ingredient of our model of quality assurance. And they started this in 2006, and now a lot of universities in the kingdom are really processing their accreditation. Recently, maybe just last year, with the pandemic and with all of these things that's happening, they started the national ranking, and a lot of efforts being done. And with the trust of the government, not only higher education ministry, but the other agencies that are around it, they always pick Effet University as a model to pilot. And this is one of the very important things that to see Effet is really like, they did the first accreditation with us. They're doing now the ranking with us. And actually, before I came, they are trying really to institutionalize the civic engagement of university as a concept, how they can institutionalize it so it will bridge the gap between the market and the academia. So this is where we are. I don't want to take time, but this is where we are in Saudi Arabia. Thank you.
Thank you. A very nice, succinct summary of the university. Thank you so much. Dr. Michel, shall we move on to you?
Thank you, Provost. I'd like to start by thanking Ashwin for organizing and putting this conclave together. I'm a newcomer to this distinguished collection of people. I'm a physician by trade. I'm a surgeon, a neurosurgeon, and I was the dean of a medical school in Lebanon after having spent 42 consecutive years in the States. I came back to try to give back to my country. Lo and behold, I got there and everything went to pieces in Lebanon. But at any rate, I can try to use my experience in the short period of time that I spent as a president of the university and before that as a dean of a medical school to share with my colleagues here what we think, what we at the Lebanese American University in Beirut think what the future of higher education should be or will be, specifically in the Arab world that has gone through quite a bit of tumultuous time over the last 10 years. But hopefully we're on the mend right now, all of us as countries in the Middle East and in the MENA region. We think, like Dr. Haifa just said at the end of her intervention, the most important thing is that we educate the whole person, the whole Arabic citizen throughout the Arab world who is civically engaged. I think our society needs help from our graduating students, people who care about the environment, who care about education, who care about public health, who care about urban development and urban spread of our cities to accommodate all the optimistic and rather very aggressive plans that many Arab countries are putting together. So civic engagement, in our opinion, is a must for all universities in the Arab world. We're trying to do our share by putting together groups for public policy that will actually address the ills of my country, which may not be the same problems in other countries. But we believe educating the entire person, not only giving them a diploma at the end of 3 or 4 years, but making sure they go out as responsible citizens, happy with themselves, happy with their societies, and making their societies happy. One. In terms of the mechanics of it, we are very aware that the future is here now. We don't need to prepare for the future because we live the future. We live a very rapidly changing future, and we need to adapt to it as agents of change in the society and as universities. We need to prepare our students and our graduates to face the market, to get ready for artificial intelligence, for machine learning, for really all the new requests and requirements of the market share. So we are trying very hard to match our degrees and match our diplomas and match our curriculum with the study of the market throughout the Arab world. We need to produce graduates that fill a gap in the markets rather than just produce people who fill spots in our classes, in our classrooms. And also, obviously, we have, by necessity over the last year or two, because of Corona, because of other things that has happened in my country, we had to switch immediately from in-person teaching, in-person learning, to online learning and remote learning. And we're happy we did that. And I'm happy we were forced to do this because the future is in distant learning, relationships and building alliances with other universities, joint appointments of professors from different countries, from different cities in the Arab world. There's no sense of building silos and paying a lot of money for one professor of, say, mechatronics in one country and several other similar professors in other countries. I think today's technology of transmitting knowledge and long-distance learning is really a good example for us to join forces together to save our own resources and especially to leverage the human resources that are not that common in the Middle East. So this is specifically for the Middle East. We think it would be good for all of us to work together, to bring our universities together, and to leverage our resources, especially in the teaching of our students and our next graduates. I don't want to connive my time. This is an overall picture of what we're working on.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to, we'll jump over the QS for a moment, and we'll come to Professor Abdallah. Could you talk to us about yourself?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I'm Abdullah Al-Hawaj. I am from Ahliya University in Bahrain. I've been with the QS for the last, probably, I attended many of QS Mabel and QS Apple and the Conclave, I think for the last 14 years, probably. I'm a member of the academic committee of Maple. I'm a mathematician by degree. I come back from a business family who have business in many aspects in Bahrain. I've been professor at the National University of Bahrain for about 25 years. I found that, everything was public at one time. And there isn't enough investment in education. So it was really, I believe that the private sector should have really a greater, portion of investment in education, in development in general. And I believed in that for many years, and till I tried to convince, my government in Bahrain that the government can't do everything. It have to be everybody involved, and a great portion of funds and investments comes from the private section or the private sector. So I was really involved in many ideas of investment and trying to make sure that we don't live, as universities in the ovary Labraj tunnel or whatever it's called. We should be a part of the development, a part of industry, a part of the market, Quality of education was always the top and the priority of all my thinking. So I have made sure that Ahliya University, as the first private university in Bahrain, started 20 years ago, is not a commercial project. It's a national project. So I agree with one of my colleagues when he said, it's a very important that we empower people. And I believe from day one that we should empower women also. And that's why from the beginning, we went and had a partnership with Brunel University in London and with the George Washington University in the United States of America. And I asked so many of my colleagues to enroll for PhDs supported by Ahliya University. I had little, of course, problems with sometimes the shareholders or even the others. We're a private institution. We shouldn't really, that's not our part. The government should be the only one which should empower people. And I didn't believe in that. I insisted that we must be, all of us, work as national projects in our different countries. I remember I attended a conference in one of the Arab states about 7 or 8 years ago, probably a little more, when one of the Minister of Higher Education came and introduced the universities and said national universities and private universities. And I got very upset and angry. And I went to the minister I said, what do you mean by national universities and private universities? This is a mistake. You should never use that word. You should say probably public and private rather than. When you put it national universities and private universities, you have an idea that we are not nationalists or we do not have a part. So I did believe 100% that private sector and the public forms the whole community, and the majority of funds and the majority of investments comes from the private sector, provided they do their job towards their communities, And for this reason, I've been attending QS, and I really take this opportunity to thank Dr. Ashwin. I think I know him for the last 15 or 16 years. They've been doing a great job. And really, the quality of education become a part of my living. It's a part of my even blood, maybe, I dream of equality. I started really, even my wife sometimes tells me, what's wrong? I said to her, well, can we do what Harvard, MIT, Stanford, in the Arab world, where I did have at the beginning great problems with some of my Arab colleagues, which used to say, well, we are different, the private sector is after profit, And I want to say here clearly, quality should be the measurement, and we believe in equality. Ranking is very important for us because, after all, we all want to be ranked better, but we must live equality and not just act for the reason of equality. So I do believe 100% that the Arab region, in the last probably 10 or 15 years, moved, We had universities increased from 50 or 60 universities to about, I think, 1,500 universities. And a lot of them now believe in equality. And I take this opportunity, here to congratulate all these universities who managed really to become, part of the equality. Because investment in education is our future. If we want, as an Arab nation or an Arab region, to be a part of the train of civilization, We must invest in quality. We must invest in universities. We must teach our fathers, brothers, sisters, please invest for the education of your children, because it's only the way we will survive, you know. I've heard stories, that's the reason why I'm saying this, that we have too many universities, but when you go and look at the statistics, you will find this is not true. We stayed in the Arab world for about 60 or 70 or maybe even more years with only 20 or 30 universities, you know. And, you know, that was wrong, you know. So I am here really, and I really encourage every businessman to make sure he must invest in education, he must invest in higher education. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I took longer than I'm supposed to. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Last but not least, Dr. Shadi.
Yes, thank you very much. We are talking about the future. That was the question. And I'm privileged to be working with the QS, where it is our vision as a company to empower 1 billion future learners. So just whenever I think about that vision, how bold is it? QS want to help 1 billion people in the future to fulfill their potential in academia and in career. So when I think about that, I can see that QS as an institution, and I'm not going to go and list all the things they do, student recruitment, all this. Let me go back to the ranking, because this is at core here. When I look at the ranking, I am management by education. I got my PhD in management, and I was always fascinated by how you link the IT to the human behavior, how you link the measurement to human behavior, how you motivate them. And what I found since I joined QS for, I think, 11 years already, and I am in the I'm a consultant by work in QS. So basically, we are the soldier who help universities around the world, not looking at the ranking and climb, basically. And I appreciate your talk about over-reliance or over-optimization of ranking. We have, and I have to personally go to rectors and provosts and chancellor around the world and say, wait a minute, and that particularly in Korea and East Asia, wait a minute. Rankings here is for a tool for you. Over the last 10 years, I've been working with the university all the way from Japan, where I studied, all the way to Mexico and everything in between. And I can see that the power of ranking to empower your future development as institutions who are the core of the knowledge system or the knowledge society in your countries and in the world by two things. The first one of them is, I really believe that you can be passionate about who you are and what you want to be. But you cannot be what you want to be unless you measure it. And the rankings, for the first time, with all its faults, with all this misunderstanding, with all these problems of a model, which everybody here is a scientist, we understand the approximation that models come. I have seen it being used to shape education in an institution, in a country, to help potential learners and future generation in this country actually benefit. I've seen institutions use the power of rankings in order just to motivate their staff. Some of them are very esteemed, very relaxed in their academic career, so to speak, and use that to encourage the situation. We have seen countries actually adopt this data insight to push the country further. So I think I am very different from everyone here because we are not the academic institution, we are the ranking institution. But I think as a QS, we look at our mission as very much future-oriented, and we want to empower every institution, like we are empowering every learner, to achieve their potential of becoming the perfect partners that students want to look for. Thank you. Thank you.
Quick summary, I'll throw it open to the floor after that. Quick summary, there's been a focus on quality from some of our speakers and equality, the importance of education. There's the idea of graduates who fill a gap in the market being important, long-distance learning as a way of universities connecting, the importance of the private sector, and the empowerment of women and equality generally, and the power also of metrics, which becomes increasingly important in our world. And all of these things have emerged, but you don't have to stick to that. Well, any questions? Don't have my long-range glasses on, so you'll just be a blur, but raise your hand and we can have some questions. Yeah, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. On behalf of Jordanian universities, I would like to thank Ashwin for organizing this event, and particularly I would like to thank University of Zayed for hosting this gathering, actually. And before making the comment, my comment about the speeches made by our colleagues here, I would like to start by talking to Dr. Haifa, whom I had the chance to meet about 6 years ago when I was a member for the committee made by the Arab Association to accredit that university to be among the universities that we have in the Arab world. And I've been watching actually the university is booming up, and it's doing well. The comment I have is about the project that you mentioned, and it is supposed to start in Saudi Arabia, where the ranking among the national universities. We had a similar experience in Jordan a couple of years ago, but unfortunately it wasn't a successful one. So a piece of advice is to watch out, not to go, in details into that, and we can discuss this with the people in charge in Saudi Arabia, because we faced a lot of problems, and at the end we changed the dilemma to have a different vision. Now, with the comments made by our other colleagues, it's quite true that ranking is as important as quality assurance in universities and the output that we are looking for. But something missing actually, and some Arab universities have started with a couple of years ago, related to what we call the national framework being embodied by some universities or in some countries in the region, and this is related to quality assurance. And if we care so much about quality assurance, about national qualification framework, and this is embodied by also the Association for Arab Universities, if we take good care of that in the coming couple of years, and this has been embedded actually in Europe 10 years ago, but we have been far away from employing that in a very national way that is related to quality. So if we are looking for equality, we need to look at that, we need to handle that, we need to take it seriously so that we can improve the quality of education, and by the end of the day, we will get good ranking because they are really associated to one another. Thank you very much, and this is my vision for the future for higher education. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we go to the gentleman behind? Would you like to? Yep.
Mansour Al-Ali, Ahliya University, Bahrain. First, I want to thank QS and Dr. Ashwin for arranging this marvelous gathering and this distinguished panel. I really enjoyed every word that was said. I just want to have more of a general question. University governance is responsible for all that happens within universities. Now, what we've noticed is that university governance has been more of reactive towards Corona, although the technology was already there. So people did not preempt the use of this and try to incorporate this online teaching and learning, which has really become a reality. Like, I loved what some of our colleagues have said. Now, my view is that here, through QS, we should really propagate and announce that local legislations and local authorities, as well as university governance, should put their hands together and try to upgrade the policies of acceptance of the dynamic world we live in, rather than stick to old-fashioned methods, as the provost mentioned about Glasgow University. And this is really the message we should take through. At Ahliya, we were able to move from face-to-face teaching to online teaching within one day because the technology was there. Bahrain has an excellent infrastructure. So I think what we should do is really look ahead and try to think of the next 30 or 40 years, what are the parameters we have that we can build on rather than wait for something to happen. And so I'll say legislations, dynamic university governance should be carefully studied and coupled together to really take education and higher education further. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. And I wonder if I could just hand this over to our panel to ask about how you coped yourselves with the pandemic and online education. Yeah, Professor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to support what my colleague from Jordan have mentioned regarding the national ranking, because we did it in Bahrain, about also 10 years ago, and they stopped doing it, we did not rank university 1, 2, 3, but we did put categories, and it wasn't worth continuing, and that's what happened with the quality assurance in Bahrain. So I do really support this idea. I would like also to mention that I am for the time being, the chairman of or the president of the Association of the Private Arab Universities. So I really was very happy to see, of course, the chairman of all of us, or the Secretary General, Professor Salame, because it's always a pleasure to meet. And I met him 2 years ago in UBT in Jeddah, University of UBT, and we had also partnership with them regarding everything, and I really going to meet with Professor Osama next week in Bahrain to concrete this relation. I believe that exactly what my colleague, Dr. Mansour, mentioned, how did Ahliya University move within 24 hours from face-to-face teaching to online teaching? At the same time, we were, I think, very lucky that we start even discovering new ideas of assessment. Because the problem, when you convert from face-to-face and you are mainly relying on tests or exams or this, what happened when we converted to online? And I want to stress, it's interactive online. It's not just online. And I want to make sure it is. Of course, it has so many problems, Students do not want to show their faces sometimes. Students do not want to verbally answer. And we have all these problems, but it's an idea for us. For the last 200 years, we've been teaching classically all the time. Now, after what happened 2 years ago, it's a revolution in education, or in higher education in, particular. So I think, with the QS, I agree 100% that for us being together and learning from each other and probably benchmarking each other, we will make sure that we will be able to make every person reach the higher education, because we shouldn't think about ourselves only. What about the countries, the poor countries in Africa or somewhere else? What about people who could not even have internet? Some of them could not have internet. Even in Bahrain, such a small country with a great infrastructure in IT, a real investment in probably artificial intelligence for the last 20 years. That's how did we cope, but still, We have few people who could not. So I think, what about the poorer countries? What about the African countries where this? So I think it's a responsibility here for us to think of the others, to think how can we make sure people can reach and get educated and properly assessed. The assessment became a problem, and we should really work together. And I'm really happy that here there is 140 universities, I've heard, and at least 50 leaders of university, that we should put our hands together and really help the poorer, help the other side. We must try to empower them. If we want what I said at the beginning, us in the Arab region to be a part of the train of civilization in the future, we need to look at the other part of us. We need to look at the, less advantaged people, the people who did not have maybe what we had, So I think, it's responsibilities of university to work, and also, and that's why I do always emphasize that we are a national project. We should not really think only of the commercial part. It's very important for us as private sector not to lose. Otherwise, if we lose, we will close. But I think we should be a part of the community, and a responsibility of every single university to show examples of empowering less people who have less than us. This is really a part which is always burning me, and I hope that since there is many leaders of university, we go ahead. We want to be ranked better, but maybe QS should be looking also as one of the indicator. Maybe Shadi can think of an extra indicator of how much the university is doing for other societies, and maybe for the poorer societies, as a part of responsibilities of universities. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you allow me, just also to going back to the core of the question, governance and response to COVID. I think what the QS have seen, because we are not only working with the Arab region, we are working with universities around the world, we were quick to sense the pulse of the academics, of companies, and of students, because we ran all these surveys and all these events across the time. It was very clear that after you cross this crisis mode of there's a new pandemic, something is changing in the world, is it the paradigm change or the paradigm shift that we are talking about for so many long in higher education, or not yet? From what we are seeing, and very early on, QS realized it might not be the case, because governance and how you can actually shift overnight to online was a privilege, was very little institutions were able to deal with. But there's also, on the other side, the demand side. When we look at the student, it was very clear for us from the beginning that students are not really appreciative of online only. So the hybrid model became more important. So during the last year, as part of QS commitment to be responsible to what's happening in the academia around the world, one of them, we published a lot of reports about what other segment of the academia are thinking about COVID very clearly. We had a lot of seminars and thought leadership about how to deal with the crisis, but also we fastened, or we speeded, we introduced quicker the STAR evaluation of online learning. Again, it's a model, but it's a starting model, and it was efficient for institutions to map themselves to their one. But I think so QS does have that all the time, but I think the question that I really would like to hear from our esteemed colleagues about the issue of governance, because it's very difficult to move a university when you have, like we have here, universities that are bigger than cities, representative here. how you can move overnight, how you can deal with the limited resources. These are not easy questions. Online, again, this is a final, online so far is not the solution. We did not find the solution in academia from what we have seen in QS. We are looking for it together. So anyone who can share their experience of what has happened and what will happen in the future might be interesting as we map the future learning in the region. Thank you.
Dr. Michel.
I would like to go back to the question that was put forth by Dr. Mansour. I think there are two items, Dr. Mansour, that you have brought up. One is we were reactive for COVID. It is true. I'm talking as a physician, because COVID was not easy when it started. It really killed a lot of people, even in the United States and in Europe and all of that. So it is no small feat that we have to fight COVID. We fought it, we all fought it, we continue to fight. It's not over yet. But the best thing, what we did, we think works, is to vaccinate everybody in the university. We have a student body of about 8,000 and about a little bit over, we have about 10,000 constituents in our university. We had to go out, raise funds, buy and purchase the vaccines, and deliver 2 vaccine shots for every single person in the university before we could open the gates. We did not open the university unless we had, I was hoping to get 70% of vaccination rate to reach manat al-atiya, the herd immunity. We were surprised to get 98%. We in our university, we have 98% vaccination rate among students, professors, and we even brought the families of the students and professors because they were older to vaccinate them so they don't get infected by asymptomatic carriers that are vaccinated. And only then we opened the university. And now we have face-to-face delivery of material. This is on the COVID, whether we were active or reactive or the governance. The president took the decision, we have to open the gates, we have to vaccinate everybody before we open the gates. The other item about online learning that you put on the table, I think online learning is here to stay. Probably not in its current form. We cannot ignore it. We will use it. Everybody is adopting it. However, there are a couple of challenges. One is, like it was mentioned, the quality. What are the norms? How do you define the quality of online learning? How do you avoid abuse of online learning by small for-profit universities that will abuse it? And they will hold, and they will give diplomas based on perhaps no attendance whatsoever. It's very hard to regulate. So regulation is very, very important. Parallel with adopting online learning, you have to really regulate it before it becomes well-structured and it has norms of quality. The other big problem with online learning that we're facing, and we will continue to face probably in the near future, is experiential learning and assessment. Experiential learning, especially those of us who have health science schools, who have a medical school, who have hospitals, that you have to train physicians. You can't teach them. You can teach them maybe the curricula of Med 1 and Med 2, but once you get to the clinical teaching and the clinical learning, it is very difficult to do it online. You have to send them in the field. You have to send to the hospital bed to learn. So that is the problem. And last but not least is the assessment. We tried to deliver some exams online, and there was a lot of cheating. So assessment is very difficult with online, and until we find a solution for assessment and for experiential learning, the teaching will remain hybrid at least. Online for things that don't need experiential, and in person for experiential learning. I hope I answered your questions.
Thank you. Shall we take a few more questions and sample some ideas? Yes, sir.
Well, I would like to first to thank Mr. Ashwin and all the QS for inviting me for this very distinguished meeting. And I'm, as our friend from Lebanon, with the same background. I'm a professor of surgery, liver transplantation, and for the last 30 years, and I've been the dean as you for the Faculty of Medicine, and then I became the president of Ain Shams University in Cairo, Egypt. And I would like to share some points because it was very interesting what I heard from the panelists and from you, Mr. Chairman, in your speech as well about the points that you raised. They were very important points. But first, let me tell you in 1 minute what's Ain Shams. Ain Shams University is the third university in Egypt in terms of time, 70 years now old. And it's a mega university. It has been mentioned by our friend from QS that some universities like small cities. Yes, Ain Shams is one of that because it's 200,000 undergraduate students, huge number, 25,000 postgraduate students, and 14,000 faculty. So it's a mega university. And when it comes to governance and to tangibility and measurement, we face a lot of challenges, obviously, with these numbers in terms of faculty-student ratio and these sort of things. So I do agree that it's important to measure always, to promote yourself and to get your a better place all the time and to get promoted in the tangible process, whether in QS or other ranking system. But there are some challenges and issues that I believe should be considered when you speak about mega universities, medium-sized universities, or a 3,000 or 4,000 student university. It's not one size fits all, and it needs some vision and a lot of discussion here. In the same kind of thinking, when we speak about online and what happened in the last 2 years and COVID-19, because we did, I think, a marvelous job with all our challenges over the past 2 years, changing everything online, but rather hybrid now, more than online. And what we did facing the COVID-19, Ain Shams University took the first prize in Egypt just a few days ago as the best university in Egypt that faced the COVID-19 in everything. Maybe the president was a physician, it helps, and the vice president who will speak in the last panel with you, my vice president is again a physician, maybe this helped, but I think we did a marvelous job. But coming to the online and hybrid, I think again it's not one size fits all, because when you speak about the healthcare sector, or the engineering and ICT sector, or the basic science sector, or the arts and humanities sector, it's not the same. In the arts and humanities, yes, the online, even if it's total online, we can do a good job. But when we come to sectors that needs acquiring skills, field, on and in field experience, gaining of experience like medicine or like dentistry, I think here total online is a big challenge, and this is what we face over the last 2 years, and that's why it will remain a challenge. It will remain a challenge for the coming even years. Coming to the exams and academic integrity and proctoring, all these are big challenges that is not solved yet. The last point I want to touch on with you, Mr. Chairman, asked about what's going on for research in this region and in the Arab region. I would like to answer your question very clearly by saying in Egypt, at least, we acquire research grants at different levels. Internationally, from the European Union, for example, like the Erasmus and Ain Shams in the last 4 or 5 years, from the 32 project of the Erasmus in Egypt, 15 of them were gained by Ain Shams. So this is from outside Egypt. Inside Egypt, we have strong bodies for granting research projects and different projects at all levels. This is the Egyptian Academy of Research and the STDF, or the Science and Technology Fund. These are two strong entities in Egypt granting research, and its capabilities and how much they give in terms of numbers and money is increasing year after year, being supported by the state. And at the university level, again, we are on the rise in terms of granting more research. For example, I can give you figures that is 6 or 7 years ago, the amount of research granted by the university, not by the country, in Ain Shams University was around 2 million Egyptian pounds. Just the last 2-3 years, this jumped up to 10 million pounds and 15 million pounds. But when we sum up the three entities that grants it up to 150 million Egyptian pounds per year from the 3 entities I mentioned, internationally, nationally, and locally from the university. And I liked very much what the Australian model you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, and I think it's time now for us in Egypt and for the Arab region to try to think this way, because yes, in the ranking system there are different parameters, reputation, employability, these are all good, but at the end of the day, it's research that counts. And if you want to be more visible, it's research that counts. And this is still a big challenge in this part of the world. So maybe the Australian level and joining forces, and whether at the national level between Egypt universities, national too, we are not in, I would say we are a public, not a national, because I don't want our Bahraini friend to get crossed. Yes, we are a public university, and we encourage, of course, our friend from the private sector. But I think working together in the research aspect, nationally and regionally, could be a big answer for what you just raised as a question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Shall we take a few more comments before? Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank Dr. Ashwin and QS, of course, for the invitation, and of course, Zayed University for hosting us today. Well, my name is Amr Salama. I am the Secretary General of the Association of Arab Universities. And, well, actually, I would like to thank the distinguished speakers about their, whatever they said. Actually, everything they said was very useful, and let me comment on 2 or 3 points. The first one is about e-learning, and although the Association of Arab Universities issued in 2020, very shortly after COVID-19, a practical guide for the quality of distance learning program, and this was actually a very useful guide, and I hope that a great number of universities in the Arab area and even in all over the world, because it was the IAU asked us to send them this practical guide in English, and we did that. And I hope that this was useful for most of the universities. The second, although we issued such a guide, I myself, I don't believe that e-learning is the way. The role of the university is not just educating. The role of the university is much more than that. It's building the character. It's building the human being, a human being who can serve his country or his society. It's a cultural, it's economic, it's every aspect of life. So I don't think that e-learning is a solution. Maybe it was a solution in certain time, in a certain point of time. But I hope that this will not continue. Otherwise, I don't know what type of new generation we will have in the future. The association, in the meantime, made more than 25 workshops, and a number of your guests here participated. These 25 workshops was devoted to share experience between the Arab universities, how they are dealing with COVID-19 problem. That's concerning the COVID-19. The second thing which I would like to mention, which my colleague Dr. Zafar mentioned here, is about the qualification framework, actually. And although we have in the Arab world a number of states who have qualification frameworks, Bahrain have one, Jordan have qualification framework, maybe Algeria, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, I think, and Egypt has a qualification framework which is not, it's still in the parliament, but at least they are working, they have a qualification framework. But what we are doing nowadays actually is very important, which is we are working with the Alexo, the Arab League Organization for Culture and Education. We are working with them in preparing an Arab region qualification framework. And we hope that this qualification framework will help in so many aspects, and all of us knows how can this help us, all of us. Maybe I wanted to say something third, but I forgot it just now. But I would like to thank all the participants actually for all what they have said, and looking forward for the cooperation, the more cooperation between the universities and the Association of Arab Universities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amr. Thank you so much, panelists. Appreciate the time. Apologies that we are running out of time for this session. Thank you once again. We would like to conclude this session. Appreciate it.
I would like now to call Dr. Rana Tamim, the advisor to the provost at Zayed University, to come on stage for the second session. No, thank you. Sorry, Doctor. And the focus of the discussion will be forecasting the future of work, learning today for jobs of tomorrow. Dr. Rana, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Definitely, I'd like to thank QS Ranking for organizing this event, and more importantly, I'd like to thank the panel members who will join me on this session. I'd like to invite Dr. Sonia bin Jafar, the Chief Executive Officer from Abdullah Al Ghurair Foundation for Education. It's our pleasure. We're also pleased to have Mr. Lee Kamolins, Head of Evaluation, QS Quacurulal. Even if I try, I won't be able to pronounce it properly, so QS Siemens. Mr. Rashid Al-Shamsi, Director of Career Services and Alumni, Zayed University. And finally, Mr. Caesar Wazan, Director from Qatar University. Now, with the objective of trying to get as much as possible input and questions from the audience, what I will do is I'll ask each of the panel members a different question so that we get as many input as possible, and then we can open up for everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to first off start with Mr. Rashid. If you don't, it's just the order of the questions. How do you think the future of the labor market post-COVID pandemic will look like? And what are the major changes you think we need to keep an open eye on?
Thank you, Dr. Rana. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, esteemed guest. I think the pandemic gave a wake-up call to organization to get ready for the pandemics and disasters. So I think the pandemic really disrupted the norms and created new norms, and accelerated actually the future of jobs, when we're talking about the future of jobs. So nowadays, remote working become the norm, which wasn't in the past. So something we need to be aware of, how organizations are ready for, supporting the remote working, and even like having an office, it could be a status for someone working in an office in the future. So the future is being accelerated by having a work which is really managed by performance. If people are working through, online, it's not really about clocking in, clocking out. It's all about trust of employees. It's all about achievements. It's management by achievements. So moving forward, we will really go away from the classical, organizations that really rely on the, classic check-in, check-out, and will be really place a trust on the human capital. I think also the role of organization to be ready for the future is really to invest on technology, as our colleagues in the first panel mentioned regarding, the shift from the classic university towards the remote learning needs a huge investment in technology. Nowadays, Zoom, for example, will cancel, let's say, future business trips because of cost, So this is something we will see, more often with organization being more cost efficient when it comes to the cost being spent in the future. So this is something we are also, seeing as a new norm, reflecting on the pandemic. Also, we think even services will be going through digitalization and automation because of the pace of changes. So I think there is lots of advantages, and it was really an eye-opener for us. The COVID with all the changes that we need to cope with.
Thank you, Rashid. You mentioned something which is extremely important in addition to all the different potential changes, which is the acceleration. And that's the key piece that we have noticed when it comes to the COVID and how things changed. So with the fast-paced acceleration that this pandemic forced on us, I'd like to ask Dr. Sonia, from your experience and your connection with employers in the field, how do you think, and is it possible to actually foresee what are the employers going to look for when they are checking for their employees in the future?
Sure, and thank you for the question. It's funny because yesterday I was at a session that was hosted by Standard Chartered, and that was very much exactly the same conversation this panel is having. I'm just going to make a small point before answering, but I find it interesting that this conclave is with the university groups and the Standard Chartered people. We're with the business groups. And what I'd like to see happen is have a little bit more cross-pollination. And
Definitely.
Perhaps these questions will no longer be about this level, but we can actually start talking about the nuances of how to solve these issues at a practical level. In terms of my response to that, I would say, reflecting on what was said yesterday and what our experience is, there's two pieces. I think that there's adaptability and alignment with purpose. Now, the first one I think everybody can get quite quickly, especially after the last 18 months.
Definitely.
If you don't adapt, you don't survive. The fact is that a lot of people did lose their jobs because they could not adapt. Not because there's not enough jobs out there, not because every single industry went downhill. That is not true. But when your industry went downhill, could you upskill, could you reskill, and could you move to ed tech, for example, which has skyrocketed, right? Could you move to those companies that were doing extraordinarily well because we still had the same amount of money circulating and the same amount of jobs. It's just that they shifted, and those who could not adapt could not survive. I think that's one piece. The other piece is really about alignment with purpose. And I think this sits with universities in terms of assuring that there is career guidance in a real and practical manner. And it sits with industry to assure that purpose becomes important. So when I talk about the Great Reshuffle, we were talking with the head of LinkedIn for EMEA, and people are leaving their jobs in droves because they don't find their purpose. People do not, young people in particular, are tired of working for the sake of working. That's not happening anymore. A paycheck is simply insufficient. So if their purpose is not aligned to the company's purpose, then we're not going to get that sustainability. And I think that sustainability will be a word that I use a lot, but I think that universities have a role to play in this, and it goes back to my very first point of the connections between universities and industry need to be stronger so that we can help these, I'm going to call them kids just because I'm old, but they're young people, but help these kids actually find their way so that they can have a career, not just a job.
Thank you. It's very interesting because I'll also talk about a discussion I was having yesterday with regards to the younger generation and how it is changing. It's not about just going to work, it's about going to work and finding that purpose, and that's what they are focusing on. And I think the pandemic has really fast-tracked this shift. And with that in mind, and as with any change that comes, especially when it's fast, we face challenges. So I'd like to tackle with Cesar. What do you think are the most pressing challenges that we have to face and overcome as we try to reach that alignment and that purpose?
Yes, thank you. For example, in the context of Qatar that I think is applicable to many countries in the region, the issue of sustainability also holds in the sense that new top-tier employers have emerged during this pandemic, and the university has to respond to these people in a setup that is usually geared towards graduating students for businesses, for energy sector, for engineering. These new top-tier employers are now looking at us and at the profile of our students and trying to see what we can deliver. And the sustainability issue is that do these newly emerging employers last in time, or is it just like a surge that has been caused by this pandemic and needs in some areas of IT or in some areas of health that will not enable us as a university to construct a clear strategy over the years to focus on one field rather than the other. This is one of the challenges that we are considering. The other challenge is that, and I think it's also shared across the world, not only the region, there is the social psychological factor that is also ever present here. Yeah, we all prepared for the remote work. I was coming to brag about the fact that we moved to remote work within 1 week, but our Ahliya friends spoiled that on us. So yes, it took us a whole week. Now I can say it's not only 1 week. But also the fact is that, yes, we had all the setup there for teaching online. As all our colleagues in the region, we are blessed to have very good infrastructure, IT. Our strategy at the university also that started in 2017, 2022, had this in mind as a priority. But we never thought that it would come with us being confined at homes for 6 months, not being able to interact except through this. And the platforms we used to use are for social media, for getting to know each other, not to teach and learn and grasp all this information, let alone do that the whole day. Because this is also another challenge, is that you're not limited in time anymore. So I think these are basically the most pressing issues we need to tackle and the challenges that we were facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Cesar. So you actually highlighted issues that we were definitely facing in the higher education sector with this whole shift. Regardless of the time it took us, we did it. It's great, but then it came with those challenges. If we're looking at the market, labor market per se, considering these challenges that we faced, we can say hopefully we've overcome. We're coming back to normal. This is great, by the way, seeing all the faces in person. So with that, higher education institutions still have to work hard in the coming period to actually meet the requirements of a very changing and unforeseen, to a certain extent, labor market. We definitely know now that things are changing fast. So, Lee, what would your perception be, or how do you see higher education institutions trying to meet the demands of the labor market, knowing that there's this big shift and moving target anyway?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very good question. And let me start off by reflecting on some research that we've done, which sort of speaks to the precursor of this, perhaps.
Wonderful.
So for a number of years, QS has been running a series of research with employers around the world, asking them to how important certain skills or skill sets are that graduates have when they enter their workplaces. We then look at how satisfied they are with those skills and have really tried to measure what that gap between sort of the needs and the reality of what's happening are. When we talk about the way the labour market may be adapting, I think there's a lot of discussions are going about, are jobs going to become automated? Are there going to be these new technologies and so forth that we need to contend with? But when we look at where those gaps are in the skills, it's almost never to do with these technical areas. It's, so when we look at, in the Arab region, for instance, what the most important skills are for employers, and we surveyed 75,000 employers around the world to draw to these conclusions. It was things like flexibility, problem solving, interpersonal skills, communication. These were the issues where there seemed to be the most importance in most employers' minds. We found that employers were really least satisfied with the skills that graduates had around commercial awareness, around their creativity, around their resilience when they entered the workplace, whereas they were very satisfied with the technical skills and some of the skills around teamwork, which actually is quite unique in the Arab region compared to what we've found in the rest of the world. So the biggest gaps we have found were around creativity, resilience, problem solving, flexibility, and the ability to organize things. So when we sort of look at what skills are needed for the future, I think sometimes when we look at how universities are educating people for those job markets, we focus on the wrong things. Certainly you see a lot of discussions about, we need more STEM graduates, over and over again around the world. But I think other types of courses in education actually are more effective at teaching some of these skills, and I think we need to blend the two together. Yes, we do need those sort of technical, analytical skills and so forth, but they need to be sort of fused together in a way, to address these sort of critical thinking and creativity sort of ideas. So I think there's a big question probably to pose to the people in the room here, really, around how teaching and the pedagogies applied within the universities can adapt to that type of scenario. What other activities that surround that learning experience beyond the classroom, as some of our learned friends before were reflecting on, complement those. What is taught in that way, can help equip graduates of the future, for that adapting and changing role that's going to, naturally happen.
Thank you, Lee. You've raised some really interesting points, specifically with the surveys that were conducted. And I agree with you, there's a lot of focus on the science and less focus on the social part of things. And for me, I come from a biology background, and then I shifted to the social side. So I really appreciate how sometimes people who are in the science space tend to not notice up until you venture there. I think we've done a very good job at covering the question, the set of questions, but what I would like to do before opening up the chance for the attendees, I'd like to open the chance for you. If anybody would like to comment on any of the questions that you didn't receive, I'll go in order with Dr. Sonia first. Is there anything you'd like to add before we open up?
No, he stole my statistics that I wanted to use about transferable skills. It's funny because the skill sets that you mentioned that you did research on are the exact same ones listed in the World Economic Forum's top 10 skills for 2025. So I don't think that we don't know about it, but I do think that what's happening is graduates are graduating without them. Employers are getting frustrated, I think is the word. And what has happened that I think we need to talk about in this room is the fact that employers are now creating their own academies because they're dissatisfied.
Perfect point. Yeah, perfect point. Thank you. Lee?
I'm not sure I have a lot more to add to that, really. I think that's an important point. But I do think as as leaders in the higher education world, like we do need to think beyond the classroom for how we equip graduates with these skills. So I think there's an emerging body of research really that's been looking at how students who are involved in sort of student leadership activities go on to quite successful future careers and so forth. And I think activities around that, how we give students some sort of real-life work experience through their studies as well, which happens in some ways effectively in some parts of the world, but not so much in other parts of the world. I think we need to think outside of the classroom to tackle this issue.
Thank you.
My thoughts on it.
Thank you. Rashid?
Yeah, I just want to shed lights on the UAE perspective, the UAE government perspective when it comes to the readiness for the job market. As you know, the UAE currently is celebrating its 50th year, and basically they announced a series of initiatives to do with the future of our graduates. There was a program called NAFIS, and NAFIS is all about private sector and entrepreneurship. So it is very clear in the UAE at least that the focus will be clearly on entrepreneurship. For example, there is an alumni fund being allocated for all fresh graduates with 1 billion, which will give easy loans for graduates to start their businesses. There was an announcement about sabbatical leave will be given to staff who would like to open their businesses. Even there is an early retirement plan for those who are about to retire, if they are about to start their business. So it's very clear in the UAE, the focus will be on entrepreneurship, when it comes to the way forward. And I think even the academic system needs to adapt towards the entrepreneurship, style. Also, I'd like to address another point regarding the role of the higher education when it comes to, the unforeseen challenges that you were referring to. I think the higher education needs to play, a significant role having a dialogue. They cannot really work in silos. They really need to have a dialogue with the high school leaders. There is there is a huge gap between the schooling system with the university, which needs to be bridged. Because we are speaking about the mindset of graduates, and if we are talking about the future starts from school. It does not start from universities to start with. There should be a dialogue with the policymakers, because as our colleagues mentioned, if we have policies which are very rigid, it will not enable us to function in the future in the very agile and approach which will be based on innovation. We should be having a dialogue even with the industry leaders, about what is the skills required, rather than we assuming that we know because the market is changing very, very, in a very fast pace, and we really need to catch up with the pace of change. And without having this dialogue in a very consistent and very, quick paces, I think we will be really behind the development. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashid. And finally, Cesar.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to also build on that. In our strategy that I was mentioning, we were talking about something like, creating or grooming job creators rather than job seekers. Mm-hmm. And then we thought that this was a nice cliche, and it rings, well. But in fact, now with what happened now, we've seen that we also need to teach them resilience rather than efficiency. And that brings us back to the idea of, being flexible, changing with the market, which some of the graduates were not able to maintain in this situation. Another thing is that I think this pandemic humbled everyone. The idea was before that businesses are, very efficient, and they do things better than academics. And, we are slow moving, we don't move fast. Yet again, when this whole thing crashed, top nations and developing nations suffered from the same issues, and businesses and universities suffered from the same thing. So basically, I think that this is a good starting point to build on something new and bring these together, as Dr. Sonia said, these two entities together, humbled as they are now, telling them, obviously, we were not well prepared for this pandemic. Let's do things differently this time, so that if it happens again, we're at least in a better shape than what happened right now. We had to stop living for 6 months or more. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion that we needed to have prior to the pandemic. Like, these are things that are not here because of COVID. These are discussions that we were having behind closed doors, maybe in smaller teams in different places around the globe, but the pandemic, again, going back to the term accelerated, we are at a point we can't ignore them anymore. And with the employment and the workforce, higher education, as Dr. Sonia was saying, there needs to be that integration and thinking about it with out-of-the-box approach. So maybe the co-op approach that's very common in Canada at the present time can work way well in this situation. We haven't seen that in the Arab world. So there are different opportunities now that we can move forward, and this is where I'd like to open the door and the platform for the attendees, please.
Thank you.
When I think about the question of educating our young adults for the workforce and for life, the problem that I struggle with is, on the one hand, I think as most universities, we're in a fundamental agreement that we do much more than teach technical skills. We teach, or we should teach, and these skills like resilience, flexibility, creativity, problem solving. The issue I think I struggle with as an educator is very often when our students come to us, they're thinking short term. They're thinking about that first job after graduation, and so are their parents. And so they're looking for a much more skills focus, and sometimes can be very resistant to that more visionary, longer-term education that we also need to provide with them so that they are actually equipped for all their future, not just the first job. I'd be very happy to hear what the panel has to say on that.
So, who'd like to take the question?
I'll speak to what we've done with our scholars. We've got about 1,000 scholars at the foundation across the world, some of which are at AUS and graduated and are doing extraordinarily well thanks to the wonderful education and career guidance that they received. I think that you're right, there's some short-sightedness to what they're doing, and I'm gonna go back to two ideas. One is, even if we are talking about short-sighted first jobs, if we don't train them and help them understand sustainability, which needs to be a running theme across all of our courses and what every university does in everything that they do, we're not going to be helping them get ready for the job of tomorrow. We are only helping them get ready for the job of yesterday. So sustainability, I think, has to be key, whether we're talking about renewables, anti-poverty, good governance, peace, all of the sustainable development goals. I think when we couch it in that framework, we can align to their purpose at a much deeper level and start to get past that first job. The second piece, for me at least, that we've had experience with is that they are more prone to understand the importance of that executive function skills that you were talking about when they're in a job failing, and as an intern, failing in their co-op, because they simply didn't understand that when we taught them how to write an email and communicate properly, as opposed to Calculus 101, it actually was important. So we need to convince them, but we also need to take it on ourselves, because I know some math teachers who don't think that email writing is that important, right? But I think that if we can start to take career guidance and those executive skills as seriously as we take Calculus 101, we will teach them that that first job will that pathway to that first job, whether it be internships, co-ops, that's where we can actually embed those transferable skills. That was my experience with our scholars.
Thank you. Again, also with that in particular, I think we also need to have a link with the schools as higher education institutions. Reflecting on myself and my generation, we went into university for programs we didn't really know we wanted or not, just because of what the parents or the social context. At the present time, we need to put more effort also in reaching out to the schools to get more clarity and awareness over there. Thank you for the great question. There was somebody here, and then we will go in order. If you don't mind, we'll take that question behind.
Thank you very much. It's actually more of a comment than it's a question. And this is related to not to employment, but rather to COVID and to online teaching, which is related to employment, as many of the speakers have been talking about. And actually in the Arab world, we have many stories of success, one of which was Qatar University, in which I had the chance actually back in 2004 until 2008, where we had a very successful story of employing technology in teaching courses, and also with the reform they had at that time, in which they focused on the skills. That is, they started employing that in qualifications. Now, I mean, many people have been blaming COVID. Not to blame COVID. We have to blame ourselves for not taking such chances, such as in Qatar University and the Saudi Arabia Online University, and we have also the Open Arab University. We have stories of success in which we had that kind of employment. Back to the point of the market and its need in terms of employment, not only in the Arab world, but Germany in the past 2 years actually has been looking for thousands of engineers to be employed in Germany. And they have been hunting for engineers to be employed in Germany, but the most important problem was the problem of skills, because the curricula that we have in the Arab world was focusing on knowledge only. So we have a small portion dedicated to skills. Now, back to the point I mentioned previously, if we focus on the qualification framework, which focuses on knowledge, skills, and competencies, if we can focus on these, our students, our graduates will find jobs not only in the Arab region, but also they can find jobs internationally. Thank you.
Thank you, a very good point. And I'll take the, sir. Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mansour Al-Ali, Ahliya University, Bahrain. You know, a while back, I saw a keynote speech in a graduation ceremony in the States. And the speaker said that, you know, the camera changed over 100 years. The car changed over 100 years. Then he put the picture of a classroom, and he said it's become static for the last 100 years. And this is what I will say, you know, I know we are trying to graduate creative thinking students, or critical thinkers, resilient students, open-minded students, researchers, skill-based, all of these things. We all seem to know what we want, yet we all really don't know what we want. I think one of the pitfalls of universities over the years, in my view, is that they have this idea: a student comes for 40 years and they'll keep them, they'll be happy for 40 years. They come for 4 years and they work for 40 years. So really, the skills of a computer scientist, what you teach them in the 4 years, changes over 10 years. A medical doctor's skills change over 10 years. Everything changes. So I think a real understanding of how we should think of education and the dynamism. Again, there was a good paper about somebody who sort of forecast the downfall of organizations like Kodak, like Caterpillar, and he blamed mostly the CEOs. It's well known, because the CEOs are the older generation and they can't think like young people. So I think, in my view, what we should do is be dynamic, be flexible. Universities, again, I will say one more thing. They always think every kind of education has to be in the form of a course. Who said everything you can teach is through a course, which has credits? We should be a bit more flexible in our, I don't want to go and say why 4 years and not 5, that's something else. So I think really what we should think of here, and the QS ranking is, earlier Professor Abdul Hawaj mentioned something about doing good. The universities should do good, should help the poorer universities. And based on that, I would maybe will ask QS ranking to consider maybe amongst their criteria, universities which do good to the community. This is how I'm thinking. I think this marvelous audience, these distinguished people here today are really their agent for change. And this is what I want to say. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great point with regards to the need to change faster. And I think, as the panelists noted, the pandemic has fast-tracked that. Anybody would like to respond? We'll take the question.
Thank you.
There.
I'm Islam Massad. I'm president of Yarmouk University in Jordan. And during the pandemic, I had the chance to work in 3 places, which was related directly to education and medicine, since I'm a doctor. I worked as a dean of School of Medicine, then I worked as a director of a university hospital. Then recently I was appointed as a president of the university. And I believe that the first problem that we put guidelines, first I want to comment on something that was termed guidelines. Guidelines, usually we put them after evidence-based practice for a long period of time. And everybody of us thought that they put guidelines to deal with a pandemic which is new for all the world. And I think this was an assumption rather than a guideline. So it was all ijtihadat and trials or suggestions which was not changed and we were obliged to follow. So for the previous panel, I wanted to raise the point that actually the guidelines or dealing with education during the pandemic should be different, and we have to give more room for the academic staff themselves. We, as president of university or decision makers, we sit and we decide accordingly, and we don't leave the freedom of mobility for the academic staff. And this is one of the major problems that we faced. We have scientific schools, humanitarian schools, we have big classes, small classes, we have postgraduate study, we have higher education or graduate studies, and all these variables should be considered, and actually there is nothing that is suitable for everything. But let me say, concerning this panel discussion about the skills or what do we need for the employees in the future, in the near future. And this is as well as pandemic. We learned from this pandemic that there should be dynamicity, and there should be تعليمات or regulations that work with, that is changed and follows the demand of the situation. And I believe I second Dr. Al-Ani, which is a very important point he raised, that concerning the classrooms or the bachelor degrees or that we teach in most of our universities, which is usually from 4 to 6 years according to specialization. Do still our students need to study in the universities for 4 to 6 years, a pure theoretical most of subjects, or they need to have more skills? And I second Dr. Rashid. I think the connection between the schools, preparation of the students in the schools and the universities, these should start early. And one of the most important things that the new generations in the universities should learn, in addition to, of course, the IT skills, is the ethical part. We noticed that we had a problem in the ethics of education and ethics of practice. We noticed that there was a problem in exams. We noticed this actually in the future when they were employed. And this is something that is very wide and subjective. I don't know how can we do that. It needs life experiences from non-ethical people to stress on. I think maybe we should go back as early in the previous century for diplomas rather than bachelor degrees, and stressing on these skills, the ethical part, the technology or the fine skills, and innovation, that self-employment is important for the future, for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody would like to comment? Please.
Maybe I'll comment on that sort of general idea. So there was the discussion around ethics, and quite a few people have mentioned the importance of universities being this driver of social change and, providing access and, sort of maybe, the sort of equality sort of balancing role. I think these discussions, we sometimes turn into quite an abstract type of thing. I think really here, to some extent, we're talking about issues around sort of human capital development, really, which, I think really speak to some of the, key pillars in the, UN SDGs, for instance. And I do think universities have a role to play in it, but we do need to track back to that sort of what happens before university a bit as well. Before I was at QS, I worked in the education department in the UK. And I so vividly remember one statistic we looked at where I think it was 9% of students who came from families that had no history of university education dropped out. It was 9% of students who. Only 9% of students who came from families who had no history of education in higher education completed their university studies. The dropout rates were phenomenal, which meant, of course, the students were never going to develop any of these sort of skills we're talking about today. So I think there is a discussion that needs to happen outside of this room with people who are working in that space a bit more to fully address this issue. And until we do that, I think the role of universities in driving that change, is almost more a harder issue to deal with. I don't know. That was just my reflections on that discussion.
Thank you. Cesar, you had something.
Just quickly to mention, yes, that definitely, I don't know about the length of the, degrees, whether we should give diplomas or, this is a job that is beyond me, but definitely more practicum part is definitely needed. But this is what the employers, are seeking now, more hands-on or more practical experience in the curriculum should be introduced. That's definitely the case.
Definitely, thank you. I'll take a question from here, and then I want to see if there's any question on this side, because my eyesight is. So please.
Good evening, everybody. Dr. Nasser Al-Jarallah from Al-Ma'rifa University from Riyadh. It's a private university. Since really we are talking about the future, so it's mainly focused on the opportunities, really. So the university should allocate themselves to the best opportunities with them. For example, we have already, in Saudi Arabia, we have an Al-Ma'rifa University. Since in the Saudi Arabia, we start the 2030 vision for the Saudi. Now we have already about 20 a strategic project we are dealing with to reach, inshallah, for this 2030 vision. So you should cope up and you should find the best opportunities for yourself, starting from the small learning university to a startup companies to a mega project university. So this is how you select the opportunity and how you participate or create the opportunity within your context, even national-wide or international-wide. I think this is the most important one. Second point is the self-learning. Still, we are not focusing on the activity of the self-learning. Our students really, they had their ways and they had their strategies to encourage their learning opportunities. Even we don't know about it. Our university, we don't know about these strategies or tools, but I think documenting these activity within the quality process, it is one of the parts which we are doing in Al-Ma'di University, but I think it is better also to be included in the ranking criteria.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Anybody has something to add? Yes, Rashid.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge, the point being mentioned regarding the self-learning, because being in the career department, what we notice from employers in the industry is all about self-development. They are looking for people who can make an impact right away from day one. So actually, I think self-learning or even like self-development, it's something that should be embedded in the career guidance, sections, So I totally agree on the importance of the self-development or self-learning, because this is the lifelong learning skills that our graduates should be equipped with if they want to go to the industry, and make an impact from day one. So it's just to acknowledge the point.
Thank you, Rashid. Please, we'll take that and then, so please. There is someone here. Okay.
Hi, I'm Sadiq from Saudi Arabia. I teach in the College of Computer Sciences and also the director for IT research and a few other things. The university is King Fahad University of Petroleum and Minerals. I have a few comments. I've been in higher education for the last 45 years. I'm also a consultant to a few universities. We did talk about employability. We have been talking about skills versus degrees. But the theme of this event is enhancing Arab excellence. And we're also talking about a new vision. I think if you look at the problems in higher education, I have 5 listed over here. One of them, of course, is unemployability. We have the issue of massification, where more people are aspiring for degrees, but the universities have not grown at the same rate. We have a problem of cost. Cost of telecom has gone down in the last 25 years. Cost of travel has gone down or stayed the same in the last 40 years. Information has increased, but why is the cost of higher education increasing? Exorbitant, unaffordable, not only here, but in the West. The other thing which we have ignored completely is the stakeholders, the students. They are much more tech savvy than we ever thought before. Now, what we need to do is, do you have any vision or any thought about doing something surgical to your university system so that you can plan? We were lucky with pandemic because technology was available for us to use Zoom and Teams. If that was not there, how would you have handled the situation? I'd like to listen to your comments on this and also from the previous panelists.
Yes, if you don't mind, thank you for bringing this up again, the Arab excellence. And this is an everlasting issue of debate that I have with QS and with other ranking agencies. There is no doubt that we have excellence in the region. We're not waiting for the rankings to prove it. You just have to see the rate of acceptance or the number of students that are going from Egyptian, Lebanese, Syrian universities, Gulf region to the West, the top universities, and that are doing well. So this is definitely, there is this excellence, and with all due respect to all rankings, it's for their own good that they should show it somewhere. If it's not shown, then, as the previous panelist said, there's something wrong with the ranking itself. But beyond that, the idea of having excellence through rankings is not something that we believe in. It's definitely a good point to raise, which is to know how we compare to each other, how we compete with each other in those rankings, but not to prove anything to the rest of the world. So that's just about the Arab excellence thing, and just wanted to comment on that. Thank you for bringing it up, because I wanted to say it even if it's not very relevant to what you were talking about.
Anybody else?
There's been a few people who have commented on this question of these issues being reflected well in rankings, so I thought I would speak to that a little bit. I think tomorrow is probably the day for a bigger discussion about it.
Okay.
I think rankings tell a lot more, a much bigger story about universities than what the individual metrics measure. I actually had a discussion just before this session started with someone where they were asking me about university reputation and how that's reflected in rankings. And you know, I've had this discussion over and over and over again, you know, over the years with people and asking me how do we improve in this metric? And I think that's when we look at our reputation metrics, they are something that speak to all of these issues. You know, I think if a university isn't seen to be doing good in the world, their reputation is not going to be reflected well. You know, if they're you know, not seen to be those drivers of change in society, you know, building you know, people, putting the right people into the workplaces for the future, you know, it's not going to be reflected in their reputation. So I just wanted to almost challenge back on that point that rankings aren't reflecting this at the moment. That said, yes, there are other stories to tell in other ways, and I suppose watch this space, because QS is working on trying to look at some of these different lenses in different ways. Yeah, but I
Okay.
would say it is reflected to an extent in what's already there.
Okay, thank you. You have something? Okay. The thing is, these are amazing points that are being raised. We have one question there, one question here, and I'm not sure if we'll have the opportunity to go for more. This is a very interesting discussion. We'll try to take two
Well,
comments.
thank you very much, Mahmoud El-Miteni, President of Ain Shams University, again, and I think this is the most important topic of today that we are all concerned with, and thank you very much for organizing this special panel and discussion about how fast the labor market is changing and the dynamics that's changing. And actually, we are always referring to these days to the COVID-19. I want to draw the attention, it's not only about COVID-19, it's about the fourth industrial revolution that was before 2019. And if we look to the McKinsey report in 2018, and where very much, in a very good way, dissected the kind of skills that will be needed over the coming 10, 20, 30 years, the five going from the manual to the basic cognitive to the advanced cognitive, and then to the soft skills that has mentioned about the resilience, the teamwork and leadership, what we call the soft skills, and lastly the ICT and technology skills, and saying that the first two skills will disappear. There will be no need for the manual or the basic cognitive in a way, and all the workforce will go to the need skills. So to set the stage for the coming period and for the labor market, the very rapidly changing labor market, I think what we call now is the fourth generation universities, to have this kind of university based on the biggest challenge in it will be the new form or reform of the curricula to be more into multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity rather than the classic standalone faculties like Faculty of Computer Science, Faculty of Agriculture alone. This will be always in the backyard, but to serve the multidisciplinarity for new kind of degrees and entrepreneurship and innovation. If we prepare our universities by these three pillars, I think we will be setting the stage well for the ever fast changing labor market needs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is William Tonsi. Thank you very much for providing us this opportunity in this great discussion that we're having today. I'm William Tonsi from University of Business Technology, Saudi Arabia. It's a private university, 20 years university in Saudi Arabia. And talking about the theme of today, which is very interesting discussions that we're having. Learning today for the jobs of tomorrow is the theme of the discussion, or the theme of the discussion of the sessions today. As a nation, and previously in the previous session, they've mentioned that rankings are adopted by nations in terms of setting the agendas forward. In Saudi Arabia, there is a nationwide objective to have a handful of universities to be at the top universities in the World University Ranking, including QS. And not only that, but also in terms of the theme of the discussion today, of learning today and for the jobs of tomorrow, the Kingdom also have adopted this mindset in terms of having education for job opportunities. In terms of UBT, and I also would like to have the panel comments on that. In terms of UBT, we have adopted that model since our start as an education for job opportunities as our slogan. And we also have adopted that model in our strategy in terms of having market-driven high-quality programs where we come close to the market needs and we align our design of the curriculum to match the needs of the market and the profession in the market, and how we come closer to understand the market needs based on the feedback from industry through advisory boards that are attached with the programs that builds on the feedback on a continuous basis, and then we adjust our programs to that understanding. And we also believe that this cannot only happen by high education and market-driven designs of the curriculum, but we also think that this, as mentioned by Dr. Izzat earlier, that this should be also part of the philosophy of the education system, of the learning experience, what happens beyond classroom, as mentioned by our colleague and the panelists, that we should focus not only about what happens in classroom, but also about what we call it at UBT, the holistic student experience, where extracurricular activities, field experiences, practice that goes into the practice and the field be part of the design and be. So I would like to have the comment of the panelists on how can we reach this and how can higher educations, this is how UBT does it, but I want to know from the panelists what's their advice in terms of how can we educate today for the tomorrow's job opportunities.
Please. I'm going to try to just give a couple of examples. I see a diversity. You know, I love that we're talking about Arab excellence in the Arab region, but there is such a diversity within the Arab region. Talking about the UAE versus Tunisia versus Jordan, you know, it's just so diverse. And, you know, in the business world, we call it localization. That's the new tech term. In the evaluation world, we'll call it context-based. You know, so I think that people are doing really good jobs in pockets of excellence. And I will take the ones that I know as examples. Zayed University, who's our host, and that's not why I'm taking them as an example, but I just happen to think that Her Excellency is super visionary. I am so excited with the changes that she has made to Zayed University. Bringing on Minerva is bold. They've brought in Minerva University, and so this gentleman here who sits so calmly must look like a duck with his little, because what he is doing and what they are doing is revolutionary in this region, bringing in and embedding that experiential learning and demanding that students from the first year go into work and start there. And you know, I think the only word that actually is not a very good word in an academic setting, but I'm pretty sure that the profs must be freaking out. That's got to be the word for it, because it is so different in how you need to teach. And they're doing it, and they just said, we're going to do it because this is what the students need, and this is what our nation needs, and we're a federal university, so this is what we're going to do, and we're going to try, and we're going to be bold. And so that's one way of doing it. I know that there's a university, another one, and I don't know if they're public about it, so I'm going to keep their name out of it, but they are actually looking at institutionalizing co-ops in the UAE and looking at it in the region. And they're doing it with absolutely no support from accreditation. So they're looking to stay accredited and do it as an add-on, right? And then look at how the government can be more supportive. And they're working with us, but I can't say it because I don't know yet. You know, there's AUS that has the virtual fairs and does internships and are, you know, they do such a wonderful job, and I know this personally because I've seen where my students have landed, my scholarship students have landed, and it's nice that the new chancellor is in the room to know that she's inherited this wonderful university. But there's pockets of excellence. Luminous University in Jordan. It used to be a technical vocational school. They're now a university. What they have done during the pandemic is switch online. And because they have the Abdulaziz School of Advanced Computing, I'm very aware of what they're doing. Out of 122 students, when they switched online, there was, I think, 111 who got jobs during a pandemic with above average salaries, staying where they are and being online and working remotely. So I'm going to respectfully, very respectfully, disagree that online learning does not have a place in higher education's future when the pandemic is over, because work is going to be hybrid. And I see pockets of excellence that are different depending if you're in the UAE or in Jordan or wherever. I see the pockets of excellence, and I think that if the rankings are talking about reputation, they look at the context. Evaluation is super nuanced. It's very nuanced, and unfortunately you end up with this one number. But if you dig deeper, you can see where it's at, and there is a lot of excellence here. I'm going to stop there because I get very emotional about it.
Thank you for a very emotional yet very helpful and spot on, I think, final comment. Again, this is an amazing discussion that's highly needed. I don't think any 1-hour panel session can cover it, let alone a whole with everyone on board. I'll try to just summarize very briefly what my takeaway from this discussion and all the input. We're looking at excellence in higher education in the Arab world. Excellence is there. One component of it is through ranking, but there's so much more to excellence that is being seen on the ground. The pandemic has fast-tracked important questions and fast-tracked important changes. We need, as we prepare for the future of employment, we need to keep an open dialogue and discussion between higher education, the business sector, and the schools. We need to be flexible and resilient, and we need to think out of the box in ways how to promote those skills that are more on the social and integrated with regards to our students. Thanks a lot. It's highly food for thought as we go at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rana Tamim, and to all the panelists. I'm going to call to join me on the stage Dr. Michael Allen, the Associate Provost for Research at Zayed University. Dr. Susan Mum, who is the Chancellor of the American University of Sharjah. Thank you very much, Dr. Mam. Dr. Habib Fardoun, who is the advisor to the president of King Abdulaziz University. Dr. Habib. And then Dr. Abdel Fattah Saoud, who is the vice president of Ain Shams University. Thank you very much. So let me join you as well on the stage. So in 1714, the Parliament of Great Britain passed the Longitude Act with a reward of £20,000 of the time, which are millions of pounds of today. And it would be granted for who would be able to calculate precisely and practically the longitude when being at sea. The scope of the challenge was very concrete. The consequences were immense. So we had scientists, artisans, experts from very different backgrounds engaged for decades to try to take up the challenge. Mathematicians, astronomers, and even very disruptive at the time, clockmakers, and together they achieved it. And so, in a way, this is our topic today. Applied science in the areas of interdisciplinary studies. So we had a wonderful tour this morning at Zayed University, and we saw a lot about the new innovation with the Minerva project. So I would like first to ask you the question of what is the importance of applied science for the region and specifically in your institution? So I would like to have your opinion. Please, Dr. Allen.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacques. And what you have your introduction to this question, I think, suggests a very important aspect of the question, and I think it's something that we all know, which is that interdisciplinary research is not new. It's been going on for, I was going to say decades, centuries is more like it. So I think the question for us as we look at the way in which our institutions engage with interdisciplinary research is to figure out what is new. Because the idea of research that doesn't just cross disciplines, but that partakes of the insight of one discipline to enrich another, that's not the new thing, even though we're perhaps more conscious of it now. The new thing, as I see it, is twofold. One is the degree to which policymakers and academics and others are calling for more interdisciplinary research. It's not that academics necessarily have just woken up to the reality of interdisciplinary research, but there's a larger public for that now, I think. The call is everywhere. In fact, it's become so sustained that some people who are stepping back, taking one step back and trying to figure out what's interdisciplinary about interdisciplinary research, have suggested that a lot of supposedly interdisciplinary initiatives are really just reconfigurations of old data and old studies. That is, the data themselves were not gathered, were not informed by interdisciplinary thinking, but now interdisciplinary thinking is being applied retroactively to data that were gathered in a very monodisciplinary way. So that's one thing that's new, the degree to which a wider public is calling for interdisciplinary research. The other thing that's new, I think, is the rationale or the justification for interdisciplinary research, and it's twofold. And this is where particularly a public university like Zayed, to get back to part of your question about how our institution engages with this question, this is particularly important for a public institution like ours, but as some have suggested that we should blur the line between public and private institutions because they all serve the national public. But the rationale for interdisciplinary research has changed in two ways. One is the strong feeling, I think, among our external stakeholders and internal stakeholders as well, that science and research must be accountable to society. That wasn't always the case, but I think there's a very strong sense that science and research have to be accountable to society. The second part of that rationale is that science must support innovation in the economy. The logic is that innovation is seen as supportive of economic growth, scientific research is seen as crucial to an innovation ecosystem, and this greater sense of accountability, I think, has placed more of the burden on universities to rationalize to a larger public what it is they're doing. At the same time that this sense that we need more interdisciplinary research is on the rise. So in this environment, I think that the great challenge for universities isn't to just talk about how interdisciplinary they are, because it's not really a contest to see who can be more interdisciplinary and who can launch more nice research centers or interdisciplinary innovation centers like you saw outside the university this morning. The great challenge is how to ensure that this research leaves the university and serves that public that's calling for it. That's the first part of the challenge. The second part of the challenge is how to embed interdisciplinary research into faculty career structures. Through university reward system, where there's promotion systems tend to be sort of founded on older assumptions about disciplinary research. How can we make sure that interdisciplinary research serves the career ambitions of our faculty? So those are my initial thoughts on this chart.
Thank you very much, Dr. Allen. Dr. Mam, what's your perspective from the American University of Sharjah?
It's a very interesting question, and I liked your preamble because it reminded me that research didn't start living in disciplinary ghettos. It started out as a very broad, holistic thing, the sciences. And the sciences really encompassed everything from theological studies through to studies of the human body and everything you can imagine in between, philosophy, you name it. And then as universities developed as institutions, we siloed our areas of knowledge, primarily, I think, for bureaucratic convenience as much as anything else. And then we came to see that as natural. And it's not necessarily natural. And as we encounter what, a few years ago, the buzzword was all wicked problems. We all had wicked problems as a nation and as a world that we needed to solve. We started to unbundle some of these ideas about the need to maintain disciplinary boundaries and a kind of disciplinary purity, and even a disciplinary language that nobody else could understand. So I think that, in my mind, one of the really key things in this unbundling and to a reversion to an interdisciplinary approach to the world's problems is our own students, because particularly if we can engage undergraduate students in research with faculty, they want to apply that research. Their natural inclination is towards application, just as the natural inclination of governments is towards application. I often think undergraduates and governments think very much alike when it comes to the question of what do I do with this knowledge. And so it's really interesting because if we bring our students into research, we can use them as voices of challenge when we fall into our old comfortable patterns of, oh, I'm a historian, I don't work with anthropologists or sociologists or, heaven forbid, neuroscientists. I'm going to use an example from my own disciplinary background because, of course, a lot of people assume that historians live in a box that stops at the start of the First World War. But I'm going to use the most extreme example I can think of. When the Max Planck Institute started this giant research program into the history of the emotions, and the Australians picked it up and started a very excellent one as well. Everybody assumed it would be a bunch of humanists talking to each other about how music and art made them feel. But in actual fact, when you do interdisciplinary work in an area like the history of the emotions, what are you actually dealing with? You're getting fantastic research on things like, and this is research that students are contributing to, fandom in political movements, how political movements can be caught up in a kind of 21st century fandom where celebrity becomes extremely important. The study of public effect. If we didn't notice anything else about how the citizenry of the world responded to the pandemic, we noticed they responded emotionally as much as they responded rationally. So these are just a couple of really simple examples of how excellent research that's being done crossing all of the disciplinary divides can be enriched by students saying, this is what's happening in society. There's a pandemic on. I need to use what I know about history, anthropology, sociology, politics, neuroscience, biology to understand why the citizenry is responding to these scientific challenges as they are. And I think there's really no limit to the potential of interdisciplinary research, and it has expanded far beyond what we often think of as interdisciplinary confined within the STEM subjects.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mam. So we have actually interdisciplinary in our panel, and now I would ask to Dr. Habib, who has a background, if I'm not mistaken, both in computer science and education, to have his perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, it's really nice to talk about interdisciplinary, and mostly from the perspective of computer and education. We'll start directly with the idea of sample. What we can see right now of the influencers. Return back to the before session when they discuss about online learning or self-learning or face-to-face learning. These new future, I will not say maybe leaders, but future people that will be sustaining the world, they are learning by themselves. They are learning in a way that they can resolve all issues that they have. They know how to film, how to produce, how to write their ideas, how to make collaboration with other friends so that they have more and more, what they call it, like likes and followers and whatever it is. So all of this is multidisciplinary. If we talk about the real future of the interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary and self-ring and work-ring. And this is really what we should be doing research of. If we look for the research, real research that is published, I'm talking about only the region, even though it's so high percentage in the region. In the last 5 years, the interdisciplinary research, it's the leading here in the region. How many publications we have in the region in interdisciplinary research, and how the combination of these topics that they are working in, plus what are the hot topics that are going out and we are discovering by the time. It's through the interdisciplinary research, and this is what it provides us solutions. And again, return back to the previous sessions, and for workers, for the market that they are asking us and seeking us for, I'm following some of my students, graduates, who showed me one of the offers that he got, where they are seeking him to have knowledge in computer science, masters, and to know programming in Java, .NET, and I know what, and so on, and plus, and experience, and not to be over 25 years old. So we have to learn many of these topics and have all this information and all this interdisciplinary information knowledge before joining the market. And this should be delivered through the universities. Now, which universities are best to build this applied research and interdisciplinary studies depends. Public or private, there's no issue between them. If you are comprehensive, if you are also specific university, there's no issue with it. What we should do is to teach, work with our academics first before starting with our students to deliver them this interdisciplinary studies and research by teaching them to learn how to learn. Through this, we can then ask them to have these new ideas for interdisciplinary, to know which interdisciplinary we need. It's not like just joining mathematics with chemistry or working in medicine and computing. It's to know what is the real need, as my colleague said. It's really, there's a need to understand what is the society need, the market need, the community, and what solution should I be providing. According to it, I can build then this interdisciplinary studies and know exactly on what to do research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Habib. And now moving to the field of medicine, life science and medicine. Please, Dr. Abdel Fattah.
Thank you so much. Let me please use another way, another methodology, because I'm a spine surgeon by training, so I used to dissect the nerves very well when I'm trying to decompress them. So I will just dissect this into 4 parts, actually. applied research and science and the interdisciplinary studies, how to connect them, and where would this be really successful. Applied research is important because it is target-oriented, that's why. It solves a problem that's there in the community. And it would be a little bit cost-effective because it's well studied beforehand. So it might not be a waste of time. For a region, for example, applied science would solve some problems of the society. I'm taking an example here. You cannot, this area of the world has been a user for research for a long period of time. And this is not good, because if your problems are solved outside your area, people that are trying to solve your problem are less enthusiastic, and this is not sustainable. And it happened during the COVID period of time, when all the countries that had real research based on the problems they have, they were leading and they produced the vaccines, and all of us became users. So this is one of the things that I wanted to illuminate. In Egypt, for example, we have a water paucity that needs to be solved. We have energy challenges. We are building new nuclear implants. So we are directing research and studies towards these areas. And for my university, for example, we have been really effective towards this. We have Masri Institute of Research in Ain Shams University Faculty of Medicine that really affected by studying Egyptian genome and genomics, the way the targeted cancer treatment is happening in Egypt. We have a drug discovery unit in the pharmacy faculty that really affected the way Egypt is dealing with towards really manufacturing drugs, not only importing them. But we need to be very cautious here. This is applied research. We don't need to forget basic research. Because if every research is target-oriented, we are going to kill some of the innovative ideas just because they look like they will not work. Most of the dreams of yesterday became facts now because we gave freedom for innovation. So if you put a belt around everything, trying that this is going to be applied, this is not going to work. And look for the sciences, like social sciences and humanity. How can you just focus on applied science? So we need really to be scientists, to have applied science, but we have to stay humans. This is very important. The other thing is the interdisciplinary studies. It's also target-oriented because the problems of today are so complicated to be solved by only one science. That's why a lot of sciences has to work towards solving a certain problem. But we have a lot of challenges in this area, talking about multidisciplinarity. Multidisciplinarity is a personality. It needs to start for the student from the very beginning, from even the schools, knowing that all disciplines of science are interrelated. And this is, I think, not happening in a lot of regions or countries. The other thing is the personality of the teachers, of the professors. They need to be believers of interdisciplinarity, because if they are not believers and you have an interdisciplinary program, it's not going to work, because when the student is going to a certain discipline or department, they're trying to shape the personality of the student towards their discipline, and this is not real inter or multidisciplinarity. So again, this is gonna be target-oriented to solve a specific problem in the society. That's why they are interrelated. The interdisciplinary studies and the applied research are really interrelated. The last point is that how to make them really work, to be really goal-oriented. Goal-oriented means that it's completely different from a society to another. If the problem in Egypt is paucity of water, this problem cannot be solved in Scotland, where the problem is excessive water. So it is oriented by place, it is oriented by culture, it is oriented by problem. So do not forget basic research when you're doing the job of applied research, and multidisciplinary studies is a personality that needs to be complete. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adel Fattah. And if we focus now on the importance, we've seen all your enthusiasm and cautiousness and detailed approach, but if we focus now on the importance of interdisciplinary studies itself, because when we visited this morning, when we had the pleasure to visit Zayed University and hearing that it would become the dominant model, and in the meantime we hear very rightfully about research. Let's be careful. I'm not saying interdisciplinary basic research is not important, but basic research is essential. So what is the place and the importance that interdisciplinary studies in general should take place over monodisciplinary studies? Whoever wants to answer. Dr. Allen, do you want to, being the representative, in this panel of Zayed University?
I don't necessarily want to, but I'll start. You have the great good fortune of having two historians on this panel, so you may get a lot of history here applied to this question. But I think, again, before I address that specific question, I wanted to circle back to something that Dr. Abdel Fattah said that I think is very important, which is that in all of our zeal for finding ways to emphasize the applied sciences, and especially in an interdisciplinary way, we mustn't forget basic research, because it only takes one kind of research generation lacking basic research to just dry up all research, because I think as we all understand, really innovative interdisciplinary research of a variety of kinds is built on the foundation of basic research. And the funding for basic research is absolutely crucial, even though the practical outcome, what's going to come out the other end of it, may not be obvious. And so I think we need a funding environment and a university administrative environment that is visionary enough to understand that you may not get a return on investment for a generation. But that doesn't mean it's a bad investment. It may be the best investment ever. Now, to this question about interdisciplinarity in our educational programs, I think this is a really, really important question, because I think the question that we all have to ask as university leaders is how we focus more of our capacity, and by our capacity I don't just mean our faculty research capacity, I mean these curious undergraduates that Dr. Mum mentioned, who can in many ways drive the questions because they don't see the world in disciplinary boxes. They haven't been trained to yet, as somebody mentioned. We put them in these boxes. So how we focus more of our interdisciplinary capacity on the complex problems that you referred to as the wicked problems. I want to get back to these wicked problems for a minute, because I think it's worth thinking about. That term is about 50 years old, believe it or not. It's sort of come back into its own again. But I just today, in preparation for this, decided to reread the foundational article that talked about wicked problems. It was published in 1973, so nearly 50 years old, in a journal called Policy Sciences. It was by two faculty members from my alma mater, from the University of California at Berkeley. One was a professor, I'd never heard of this title, Professor of the Science of Design. Yes, in 1973, there was a Professor of the Science of Design. And his co-author was a Professor of City Planning. And the title of the article is intensely boring, Dilemmas in a General Theory of Planning. I mean, it's enough to not make you read it. But I suggest you go and read it, because here's how they defined these kinds of problems. And these are the problems that we're asked to address, and that we're asking our undergraduates to address when they become the leaders of their societies, and that we're supposedly training our students to address. These are problems for which there's no definitive formula. They have no stopping rule. That is, there's no way to know whether or not your solution is final. The solutions are not true or false. They can only be good or bad. This just flies in the face of much of what we think of as the outcomes of scientific research. You can't immediately test a solution to a wicked problem, because there's no laboratory that will let you know whether or not it works. Every solution to a wicked problem is a one-shot operation, because there's no way to learn by trial and error. Every attempt counts, importantly. There's no set number of potential solutions. Every wicked problem is essentially unique. I'm almost done. Every one of them can be considered a symptom of another problem. That was one of the fundamental elements. There's always more than one explanation for a wicked problem, because the explanations vary depending on the individual scientist's perspective. And finally, I thought was very interesting, their 10th feature was that the planner or designer, whoever's working on this, has no right to be wrong. I mean, this is one of the hallmarks of science, right? You might be wrong, and you send it out there to be tested by everybody else. But the planner or designer addressing these problems has no right to be wrong and must be fully responsible for their actions. As they put it, the aim is not to find the truth, but to improve some characteristic of the world where people live. If you want a good example of the kinds of problems they were aiming at, they didn't think of this in 1973 because these didn't exist. But take a look at the Sustainable Development Goals that I think a lot of universities have dedicated some funding to. These are things like eliminating poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, clean water and sanitation, reduced inequality, sustainable cities, and so on and so on. You probably know them. There are 16 of them. Every one of these is a wicked problem. And you don't know whether or not you've solved it just because you've addressed it for 30 years. Now, I took a look at our own, getting back to this question of what our institutions are doing. I took a look at, Scopus does us a favor in this regard by having the ability to search on the Sustainable Development Goals according to search strings that they have preloaded. In the last 5 years at Zayed University, we've produced 766 pieces of research, published 766 pieces of research that somehow fit into these Sustainable Development Goals. Your institution probably have done even more. Now, some of these are repeats because there are repeats in some of the search strings. But the point is, that's a lot of research. Do we even know at Zayed University or at any of your universities that you've done that much work on some of these intensely difficult problems that are so difficult that it's hard to even know where to start, let alone whether or not you've solved it? So I guess circling back in my usual historian's prolix way to your original question, one of the ways in which we can put our university capacities more in the service of these kinds of pressing questions that defy disciplinary definitions is to first be aware of what we're already doing and to figure out ways, if if we've produced 766 pieces of research in the last 5 years that relate to some of these sustainable development goals, we ought to be getting these people to talk to each other about the work that they've done. We don't do a very good job of that because we allow the faculty to live in their CVs rather than allowing them to live in the broader problems that are so pressing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Allen. Please, Dr. Abdul Fattah.
I need to highlight two important challenges that are facing interdisciplinary studies. They are needed, as I said, because they are the problems we're facing are too complicated to be solved by one science. But the two important challenges are, the first one, the mindset of people, the mindset of employers, the mindset of even of syndicates around our countries. Where are we going to put those graduates to serve in, the spot they're going to serve in, the legislations that put them in this syndicate so they can work properly and legitimately. This is number one. The other challenge is the market share. The problem is that because those graduates are there for a certain challenge, this specific spot is rapidly filled as a market share. You need just 20, 30, 200 graduates of certain discipline to solve a specific problem. So we need to be very dynamic in the formation of this interdisciplinary studies so they are rapidly changing so the graduate can still find market share when they get out to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we see here the direct link with even the previous roundtable on the importance to be able to move forward and not just think of the short-term employability. Dr. Mam?
Yes, I'd like to revert to the question you asked about, what are universities actually doing to encourage interdisciplinary research? And This for me it's both a global and a local. I think there are both global and local ways to do it. I want to use an example from a university I used to work for in New Zealand. And when an earthquake hit, a lot of our buildings became unsafe within 3 seconds. And it was, I don't know, 2 days before the start of term, something like that. So we had a problem. And of course we dealt with it. The universities recovered from that. But an interesting unintended consequence is that we had to rehouse faculty. And what that meant was that we couldn't house them in disciplinary units. And we couldn't provide them all with private offices. So when I think about serendipitous unintended consequences, I often think about this because what it meant is that we decided to open up the faculty common rooms and enlarge them so that faculty all had somewhere to go. There were very few private office spaces, and the faculty were all together. They weren't by department. And the flowering of unusual interdisciplinary research that emerged 2 or 3 years later was really astonishing because at a really intimate local level, the faculty were communicating with one another in a way that they probably had never done in the course of their careers. And the other thing is, when I think about it globally, I spent more than a decade at the Open University, so no one will be surprised that I'm a fan of online and technologically assisted learning. But we are no longer confined by who our colleagues are. By who's down the corridor. We're only confined by the depth of our curiosity and our ability to collaborate. So the potential for interdisciplinary learning globally, no generation before us has had the ability to make research connections in the way that this generation can, and we are so privileged because of that. So really, in a perfect world, I'd like to see a university able to disrupt its disciplinary boundaries locally, where it's safe to do so. And I'm not suggesting that we put the chemistry labs out in public or anything like that, but also to encourage our colleagues to think globally about, in a perfect world, who would you collaborate with? Whose work is different enough from yours to be exciting for both of you?
Dr. Habib?
Yeah, thank you very much. I will take it a different step on that. I do believe for interdisciplinary, there's a need for freedom to decide. From the perspective of the academics, as from the students. I teach programming. I'm a computer scientist. So what I usually do at the beginning of each year, I ask my students, go ask wherever you want, whatever companies you like, and return back to me and tell me what you want me to teach you. I'm trying to be like as much flexible in terms of what they need according to their perspective, because it's their future, this is what they do believe on it. For sure, I'm not giving them the complete freedom to not teach them anything or teaching them something that it's not useful, but I will discuss it with them once they return back. And this is what I do believe that it will encourage them to give them ability to be working whenever they want later on, and plus for me to be more interdisciplinary in terms of understanding more and more, maybe even though it's just in my topic, but different languages and different ways of teaching. Plus, for research, following my colleagues' perspective, at King Abdulaziz University, what we usually do is that we incentive all our academics to do research, and who do research, we will be helping them more and more, and so on. We can't join them, all of them, in one room or several buildings. We have almost 7,000 academics. So it's really hard for us. But what we usually do is that we have a portal of all research done at the university, all research groups that we have at the university, and this should be updated weekly, so that anyone who wants to do any type of research to use his keywords that he's working with, search for these in these portals and find colleagues at the university who are in different disciplines, and to see how they can work together on it and build this new also interdisciplinary work between them. It's freedom for them to decide which topics. They are the researchers. They understand much better than us of what is needed and what's not. The management of the university help provide the scenarios that they, or the place that they can work with, all the funds, all the resources needed, but they decide what it should be correct and not. Same happens with us with the relation with the market. Not each department, each academic decide the way that his students should be developing and building. So the curricula of his courses is updated continuously from one year to another. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Habib. Maybe we can open the discussion to other testimonies or questions to our panelists. Yes? Please. Yes.
Thank you very much. I am Hassan Habib from Morocco, the president of Qadi Ayyad University. But I am a mathematician. I work in modeling biological, ecological, and natural and social complex system. This is an applied research in interdisciplinary. And we are in the group biologists, economists, sociologue, mathematician, computer science people. We start to work since 1994, but the group had been stabilized and work in as we like 15 years after, because there are it is not easy to make people coming from different areas to work together. They need to understand different language. The mathematician should understand the language of biologists and vice versa. And we also have problem of sometimes when biologist has a data, he is afraid for his data, and to give it to To mathematician, he's afraid. This is something to give some delay to have results and the good results. So, what we can do? We can encourage people from master degree and undergraduate degree to learn and to work together and to make some fields in maybe in biomathematics, for example, or informatics and biostatistics. This kind of fields doesn't exist or are maybe is not so visible in our university in Arab country. What we are doing in the university now, I am the president of the university, and before I was the dean of the faculty, the big faculty of sciences in Marrakesh. We had making an atlas of researchers in Qadi Ayyad University, and we decided to have each field and each area we can encourage and we can develop. Water, and we have some excellencies in water in Marrakesh, and to work in this field of research on water is interdisciplinary. Agro-food, tourism, urban mobility or green mobility. We choose to encourage these four discipline or area or fields to and how we encourage this to make a program and financial program and to make what we can see this in English, appel d'offre, the program d'appel d'offre.
Tender.
طلب عروض.
Tender.
Proposals. Yeah. A proposed program. Proposed program to researchers and to make it together in some centers, to work together and to be maybe passionate, to give them the time they need to work together, because as I see in the beginning, it is not easy to work, because there's some, we have between people from exact sciences or people coming from human sciences, we have not the same vision to research, we have not same method to work, and we need times, and they need motivation. I cannot be long. I can see that I am happy to be here, and I would like to thank Dr. Ashwin and Zayed University for hosting this event, and it's my first time in Emirates, and I am very happy, and because I am in my second country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you very much for this testimony showing the complexity, but the possibility of implementing this interdisciplinarity. There was another hand over there.
Thank you again. I just wanted to clarify something. Doesn't this interdisciplinary thing come from the fact that knowledge is generated at the interfaces of disciplines? Aren't we confusing this with applied research? yes, Dr. Allen, you did mention about impactful and useful for the society, but applied research is where you apply science to solve a local problem, but that may overlap with interdisciplinary, but aren't we talking about something beyond that? Don't we believe that with any three distinct subjects, we can always find a connection? For example, nanosciences, infectious diseases, and mathematics. Isn't that what we should be mixing to see if we can solve some scientific problems rather than practical problems? This is just a comment. Now my question, what would be the KPI to measure if it is happening? And how would you catalyze it today? Because it's important.
Who would like to answer? Dr. Habib?
Nice to ask about the KPI. Again, I will refer to Dr. Ali when he start talking about research. Research starts from to find solution for everything and for any problem that we have. It's applied, basic, or whatever it is. Research is to find solutions, is to know where we are going and how we can resolve any problem that we are facing for our graduates, for our life, health, medicine, mathematics, all of that, what we are doing. So for KPIs, for if we are doing it correct or not, again, I do believe that it should be independent for this topic exactly. It should be like open. Any interdisciplinary idea, it's not, there's no need only for interdisciplinary, even though it's applied, to resolve a direct problem in the market. It could be as basic research to find something new. Let's discover this. What we will find with these connection between disciplinaries, with this applying it and finding how it will be in our daily life. So it should be like open. There's no say to say this is correct or this is not, this is successful or this is not. It's research at the end, even though it's applied.
Yes, please, Dr. Abdul Fattah.
Thank you for this comment. Actually, interdisciplinarity is not only targeted towards solving a problem. It could be targeted towards more understanding of a specific point. So the meaningfulness of interdisciplinarity is more understanding first and trying to solve the problems second. And just trying to solve the problem, even if you cannot do that, is the space you have to give for imagination that I was trying to illustrate. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Allen.
Yeah, I really appreciated that comment and the question that followed it, because I mean, what we were being asked to comment on earlier was specifically applied sciences and outcomes of that and how they serve the communities and nations that in which we work. But again, in talking to me, you're talking to a historian who's perhaps in the least, useful, discipline there is, as some would envision it, although those of us who studied history find it very useful, in addition to being very interesting. And part of it goes to what Professor Abdul Fattah said. Any knowledge is useful. And there are those who are particularly skilled at taking knowledge from wherever it's obtained and applying it to problems. But there are others who are equally skilled at reframing the questions, which may not seem so practical at the time, but thinking about the questions in a different way. Now, which is more useful? You can't say that one is more useful than the other, because I think the example I thought of as you were making I thought your very useful and interesting comment was actually the pandemic that we're still struggling with. Who got into the act when? As soon as there was a sense that this was more than an isolated virus that was affecting one city or one country, of course, the epidemiologists were the ones that we were hearing from the first, how this was likely to spread. And behind the scenes, the virologists and the vaccine designers were working 24 hours a day to develop vaccines, but we never heard from them because there was nothing to hear. So it was the epidemiologists first talking about it. But then what was the first breakthrough? The first breakthrough was from the social and behavioral scientists saying, look, wear masks. It's going to be a mess socially, and it'll change completely the way we live, but that's what we're going to have to do because that's what the scientist tells us. Then, you know, it was many, many months down the road that the breakthrough moment came when vaccines were developed. We 2 panels ago, I think it was discussed about the importance of getting everybody vaccinated. One of our university leaders talked about how they managed this on their campus. But before that, the psychologists, the anthropologists, the epidemiologists, the policymakers, everybody was involved in tackling this thing from different angles and reframing the questions based on the knowledge that was available at the moment. When there was no vaccine available, every other bit of knowledge had to be deployed to figure out what to do until the vaccines were developed. Now, it's sort of it wasn't intentionally approached in an interdisciplinary way. It was everybody doing their disciplinary act. And in the end, it was often policymakers who brought them together with policies or not on mask wearing, with social distancing and all the rest. The point is, throughout the year and a half, or nearly 2 years now that we've been struggling with this, every imaginable discipline, from the social sciences to the biological sciences to the behavioral sciences, has been brought to the question, not because people thought that interdisciplinarity was a great idea, but because that's how you solve the problem.
A quick comment on the importance of history. History is very important, sir. The problem of the world is no one really gets the real usefulness of history, and if people look back to the photos of the Spanish flu a decade ago, they were wearing a mask, and that solved the problem, but we didn't get it. So it's not the problem of history. No one is learning enough from history.
Thank you very much. We're almost arriving to the end of our panel. So what I take is, of course, the importance of applied science, your enthusiasm about it, and the importance of interdisciplinary studies. But beyond that, it's whether it's applied or not, the importance of research, and to make sure that research has the freedom, has the enabling environment on the long term to happen, and not to be even siloed as being only applied, because without basic research, there's not applied research. So thank you very much to all our panelists. And our session ends today, our common session ends now. You will have the opportunity to go to the, let me look at on the program, sorry, I'm a little bit lost with the name. To the Azure Terrace to have some refreshment, and don't forget at 8 p.m. precisely to be at the garden for the following of the evening. Thank you again to the panelists, thank you to the audience for a very rich debate. Thank you, bye.